4,500 babies are born prematurely every year in Scotland. Hospitals regularly treat and often save those arriving as early as 22 weeks. But still, little is known about why they are born preterm. 20 years after the death of her daughter Jennifer, Sarah Brown, the wife of the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, has spoken to Scotland Tonight about her loss and how the tragedy led to pioneering research.
Good evening. Messages of sympathy have been sent all day to the Chancellor Gordon Brown and his wife Sarah, who are mourning the loss of their baby daughter.
The news no parent ever wants to hear. Gordon and Sarah Brown lost their daughter Jennifer after she was born 7 weeks early. They had to grieve for their baby in the public eye while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I think it's made us think that you've got to use your time properly. The things that we feel are right and we've got to achieve, we've got to do that. Jennifer's an inspiration to us.
But from their loss came hope. In 2004, they set up the Jennifer Brown Research Laboratory to look into the causes of premature birth and try to give babies a fighting chance of a healthy future. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Scotland Tonight. It's 20 years since your daughter Jennifer was born premature and died at 10 days old. The pain must stay with you.
Of course, I mean, you carry loss with you always. Everyone says that when they lose someone so dear to them. And to lose a child is, of course, the worst thing imaginable. And 20 years on, we still live with that loss. But also, really, I think for Gordon and I both very much cherish those precious 10 days that we had with her.
And do you think it changes you as a person?
Lots of things change. I mean, looking forward to a baby, you're already changing. And to then not take that baby home and lose that baby. One of the things I struggled with afterwards was trying to work out how to take myself back to how I was and who I was. And I think once I understood I didn't really have to do that everything had changed, it actually made it easier to go forward and, you know, live with what had happened, know that you could take the time to grieve and learn to live with that loss, but also build from there and know that the rest of your life was ahead of you too.
I was a reporter at the time and I was standing outside the hospital as you and Gordon Brown left, and I can just remember looking in the car thinking it must be, as you say, the most horrific thing imaginable to go to hospital to have a child and to leave without one.
Well, certainly for us that was the case, and I think that's true for everyone, and I think that's what led me to ask questions about what had happened and why it had happened. And also, as people started to write to us, I learnt quite how many other families this was happening to as well.
Did that almost compound the loss, not knowing why this had happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing you're doing is looking for an explanation and sort of reaching out for what had happened, just to explain it to yourself, just to, you know, just try and understand. Everything moves at such a pace. We'd spent the time with Jennifer, those 10 days, just focused on her. So it was only really coming out of the hospital and going home that I started to think about what life would be like without her, but also to try and understand what had happened and why it had happened. And for us, there weren't clear answers. And what I realised was there often weren't clear answers. You know, you're being cared for by the best professionals in the world. As you know, we got such good care under the hands of the NHS, and everything possible was done for us and for me, for Jennifer. But it wasn't to be, and there wasn't a clear explanation or understanding. And I really wanted to know. And while I know I won't know, I think that's what set us on the path of wanting to invest in the medical research side that would lead to maybe perhaps bringing some greater understanding, hopefully to avert loss for other families, but also to bring explanations.
As you say, that lots of people sent you, there was like 13,000 people sent you messages and letters.
Yeah.
And was that people with similar stories? Was that almost the catalyst for you starting the charity, that there were so many people looking for answers?
Well, in the year after losing Jennifer, I worked my way through those 13,000 letters and cards that came in, and they were all condolence notes of all descriptions from, you know, all kinds of families. But what I found so moving was how many, you know, mostly mothers, some grandmothers, you know, some fathers explaining that they'd had a similar loss in their family, and quite how much it lasted for them. How, you know, you'd get a mother writing to me saying, 50 years ago I lost my little one and I still live with and carry that loss. And for me, I think that certainly helped me understand that this was a loss we would always have, that there wasn't a way to kind of fix it and get better, but it also really opened my eyes and made me start asking questions about how often this was happening and how many families were affected by it. And people would write, people I knew, people who I knew of, you know, well-known people, where you didn't know that about them. People don't necessarily talk about it. They move on with their families, and to the outside world, you don't see the person that's missing in their family. And I think that really struck me, really hit home. And as I was asking my own questions, I was also realizing that we needed better understanding just to try and avert, you know, have safer pregnancies, have you know, fewer premature births where possible, and where a baby is born early, to have the best care possible.
So what did your charity start doing then? It was looking at how to treat premature babies in the very crucial first hours. Was that the initial aim of the research?
Yeah, the starting point. I mean, you know, lots of people set up charities. I realised also lots of people I've known from receptions I've held at Downing Street over the years, and where I've been involved with other charities. People are very moved by what has happened to them personally or what they've experienced. So you see charities growing and building based on something that's happened, because it needs that very personal understanding. And I suppose it was no different here. As I set out to look at what we could do, I thought very quickly, this is about the scientific understanding. We need to do something that opens up more opportunity, more support, more funding. And I was starting to receive funding coming in. So we set up the charity to take receipt of it. People wanted to contribute, wanted to help build something that would start providing some of those answers. So that was the early origin of the charity, was to say, let's look at what gives the most vulnerable babies and children the best start in life. And one of the things that we would do with the research project, the laboratory-based side of it, was to look for what the causes of premature birth were, and also the consequences. You know, how does a baby born early go on to really thrive and have that, you know, best start on the par with a full-term baby? And that journey is still going on now.
And I mean, it has been very successful, hasn't it? Because what you've achieved through the research has actually saved babies' lives.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's really heartening to know. I think investing into the small research laboratory at the beginning that opened at the University of Edinburgh, linked to the new Royal Infirmary. So you've got that balance between the academic side and then the hands-on, you know, hospital expertise. So those two things coming together, based in Edinburgh, was the origin of the Jennifer Brown Research Laboratory. And a phenomenal team of research fellows. We had 4 women starting out, each with different areas of research, each of whom have gone on to great things, you know, in different places, and then new researchers come through. And now we're on the leadership of Professor James Boardman, who's the scientific director there. And he's just leading the most phenomenal team. They're just first class, and investigating areas around, you know, how you look after babies in incubators, get the right oxygen levels. They're looking at areas around infection and the consequences of that. We realise that's a really important area, even stress levels and the way babies are cared for. And then, of course, a big investment into babies long-term, born early, understanding how they grow up. And that's a new piece that Professor Boardman has started, that we're committed with him for a very long time.
Do you find it incredibly comforting then to hear that late John Smith's daughter, Catherine, she credits the research from your charity to saving her daughter's life, and I think she'd got in touch with you. Do you find that a comfort?
Well, John Smith, as a Labour leader, was Gordon's great mentor, and his daughter Catherine is our friend, and her daughter Ella was born very early up in Dundee, and she was told, as she was, you know, everything was unfolding for her, she hadn't expected to have a baby so early. You know, the care that she needed was so critical to make sure that baby Ella survived and thrived and came home with her. And she was told while she was in the hospital, do you know that everything that's looking after baby Ella now, some of this work came out of the Jennifer Brown Research Laboratory, and that's why baby Ella will go home. Now Ella's now, you know, starting school and thriving and doing brilliantly.
That's absolutely wonderful. It's a universal problem, premature baby death and disability.
Well, 60 million babies are born every year premature, which is identified as before 37 weeks. And of those, 60,000 are here in the UK. So this is an issue. that we need to look at. And what we really want to do is get in and identify some of those areas. You know, babies with cerebral palsy, babies with learning difficulties, babies with, you know, other things that we may not even know that we can look at for the longer term. So I think that information will be useful to doctors, nurses, midwives around the world, and they'll certainly look at it. And parents too are interested.
Okay, well, fascinating to hear about the work of the charity, and thank you so much for joining us in Scotland
Thanks so much, Rona.
Thank you. Now, as Sarah mentioned, being born early can have a long-term impact on a child's life chances. A groundbreaking project at the Jennifer Brown Research Laboratory is following 400 children from birth to adulthood to see how they develop over the years. Its goal is to find new ways to prevent conditions caused by prematurity. Kay Nicholson went to visit some of the families involved.
When Lily was first here, we were going hour by hour. I was absolutely terrified that she wasn't going to make it. I had to take it a day at a time, so I couldn't think. But it was like, well, she's here and she's fighting. Lily was so unstable. I didn't get my first cuddle till she was 5.5 weeks old.
Little Lily was just 1 pound 6 ounces when she was born at 24 weeks. She spent 108 days in hospital while her parents looked on in hope.
That must have been so stressful and emotional.
She had days where they said that their machinery was doing everything it could, and so it was up to Lily. There was nothing more they could do for her. So those were the scary days.
Yeah. And you get given keys to a room to stay on the unit, and you never wanted to be handed those keys because it meant that at any moment you might be called. So yeah, we spent a fortnight in the unit at the beginning.
Go, go, go!
18 months on, Lily is doing well. The care she received in those early days helped give her the best start in life. Advances in research mean medics know more about how to treat premature babies, including getting oxygen levels right in the incubator.
They monitor the O2 levels in her blood, and then if there's any change in that, they just quickly change the level of oxygen. So, but one of the things that we had heard was this thing about Stevie Wonder, that he was premature, and that the reason he's blind is because oxygen's so important, but if you have too much, it can affect your eyesight. So if he was born now, they would be able probably to deal with that. We couldn't have had better care, I don't think. And also, the nurses and doctors will never take any credit for it.
They're so humble.
They always
amazing.
say, Lily's done all of this. You know, every time you say thank you, they say, thank her.
And how is Lily now? Thriving?
She's amazing. Yeah. She's amazing.
She's just turned her year corrected to when she was actually due, and they're basically saying all on track at this stage, thankfully.
Yeah. So, in fact, one of the physios said, did anybody tell you were early, Lily?
Lily is among 400 children who are part of the Edinburgh birth cohort. They'll be tracked until adulthood, allowing the team at the Jennifer Brown Research Laboratory to examine the impact of preterm birth on their development. Why is this research so important?
Because we have a situation where 6 to 7% of all babies are born prematurely, and that number is not changing significantly. And yet many of them will grow up with difficulties because of being born prematurely. Some of them will receive a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, and some of them will receive a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. And it's important because there are no treatments for that. And what we want to do is develop new treatments to reduce the burden of those problems for children who've had that difficult start in life.
So what do you do with these children as they grow up?
We see the mums and the babies at birth, and then all the time while they're on the NICU, and then we see them again at 4.5 months to see how they're doing after discharge, at 9 months, at 2 years, and again at 5 years. And we're just now starting to see the first recruits come back at 5 years. And at each of those time points we get different types of information that help fill a picture about how the child's been affected by premature birth. MRI brain scans is a cornerstone of the cohort project. We get information from the placenta, from the mums and dads' histories themselves, how the pregnancy has gone. And we take blood samples and genetic data from the children to see which pathways lead to these healthy outcomes, but also the less good outcomes that we're trying to help support.
Oh Oh my gosh, that was scary.
Charlie, who'll be 5 in October, has been involved in the cohort from an early stage. He's full of energy. Quite a contrast to when he was born 3 months early, weighing just 3 pounds 3 ounces.
When I see that picture, which I couldn't look at for a long time, I put my hand on him and I almost completely covered him. His skin was thin. You could feel the fragility. I talked to him about the fact that he was so small, and I look at he's almost half my height.
You've now been in the cohort for a few years. How is that going?
We have sessions where they monitor their development, everything from kind of eye tracking activities to actually sort of observing the way they play in certain environments. We often get a lot of sort of questionnaires beforehand, which they obviously use to track progress. It's great to know that we are feeding in and contributing to this bank of information that was, well, it was empty 20 years ago.
Not having a clinical answer to why Charlie arrived so early must have been so difficult. Do you hope that this research will help parents in the future get those answers?
I am confident and very hopeful that we not only will there be answers, but this is also about prevention. I would hope that actually that there's a change in how we identify perhaps mothers who are more likely to be at risk of preterm birth.
And that's what the team at the Jennifer Brown Research Lab is focusing on.
We are in the early stages, but we've already made some important discoveries about how premature birth affects brain connections. I'm hopeful that we will understand more about why some women deliver prematurely, and I think that knowledge will come in time from some of the work that we're doing, and there's an enormous global research endeavour going on to try and find out why that happens for some pregnancies.
That positivity shines through in the families involved.
He's an extraordinary little boy, and he's not the only one in this cohort, and that brings an enormous amount of happiness to me and the rest of our family.
I bet you guys never take cuddles for granted now, though.
No, definitely not.
Extra cuddles. She's like, get off.
Yeah.